For photosynthesis, what I have for you in one of the handouts is I've got the two main reactions. It's like two metabolic pathways that make up photosynthesis, and it's interesting that one all depends on that light is present, so we call them the light dependent reactions. It's the one that looks like kind of like a graph going down that way. And then the second half are light independent reactions, and they can take place with light or without light. So keep that little handout. May I borrow this for a second?
Yeah.
So keep this in front of you right now, this one right here, because this is what I'm going to be talking about in terms of light dependent reactions. If you want to take any notes on that while I'm walking through, that's a great place to take some notes. All right, so remember that when we're talking about photosynthesis and we're talking about plants, algae, or cyanobacteria, the majority of them use chloroplasts. Occasionally you have like a bacterium that uses a chloroplast-like structure that's not quite evolved to become a full chloroplast. The light-dependent reactions happen in the thylakoid membranes. So when you take a look at a chloroplast of this structure, you remember back to last week that each of these little sacs is called a thylakoid. A stack of thylakoids is called a grana. Granum are plural. The membrane of the thylakoid is where the light-dependent reactions happen. So in your diagram there, that is happening within the membrane of the thylakoid. So me grabbing Henry's every time. So all of this is within the membrane of the thylakoid. The membrane of the thylakoid looks very similar to a cell membrane. So what you're talking about when you have all these little circles, they're essentially like protein carriers that are embedded in the membrane. We have two systems that occur within the thylakoid membrane. They're called photosystems. Again, reminding us that photo is like light, that you need the light for these systems to work. The photosystems are made up of chlorophyll pigments. Remember, we also talked about accessory pigments like carotenoids and phycocyanins, those accessory pigments, and then also electron-carrying molecules. We looked at ATP and NADPH last week also as electron-carrying molecules. There are thousands of these photosystems within the membrane of the thylakoid. We call them photosystem 1 and photosystem 2. We actually start with photosystem 2 and it goes down to photosystem 1. We'll get to that in a second. All right, so again, parts of the photosystem. Each photosystem has two big parts. It's got the pigments that are absorbing light energy from the sun. So what we call those are the light harvesting complex. Each of these is made up of around 300 pigment molecules, chlorophyll, and accessory pigments. There is one very specialized chlorophyll called the reaction center. In this group of pigments, they're all grabbing up energy from the sun. They're absorbing it, and they're all passing it to this one very special chlorophyll molecule, the reaction center. So they're all just kind of doing the job of absorbing and giving it over to this reaction center. They're making it like fully energized. Then you have the electron transport system, ETS, or electron transport chain, ETC. And electrons are going to travel across these proteins. They're going to be giving off energy at each step. So we'll walk through this in kind of like words, and then we'll look at it more in the context of that, but I'll try and keep them both in sync since you have that in front of you. So photosystem 2 creates the energy carrying molecule ATP. Photosystem 1 makes NADPH. The light reactions, the light-dependent reactions, are making these two energy-carrying molecules. They're grabbing up energy so that these, in the light-independent reactions, that second metabolic pathway of photosynthesis, can break those down to start to make important stuff like glucose. So they're going to hold on to the energy that eventually is going to make glucose, but much later down the line. Okay, so let's start at the beginning of photosynthesis and of the light-dependent reactions. All of those pigment molecules are grabbing up. They're sucking up energy from the sun. They're passing it over to the reaction center. They're charging up that one special electron. It's kind of like an energy grid is sending all of that energy to one place, like maybe your house, for example. What happens is electrons are there at the reaction center. Oh, the electrons are in a low state of energy, but when they go to the reaction center and all that energy is passed on, they get really energized. And you have these electrons who are kind of tired of getting like, ah, I've got energy. So that energy is passed over to them. Where do you think they're going to give the energy off to? They're grabbing up this electron, these electrons that are getting energized. What are they going to make? Not yet. What are they going to make in this? Which ones? Yes, we'll get there though. But big picture, what did I just say we're going to make in the light-dependent reactions? ATP and NADPH. So eventually what they're going to do is they're going to take the parts of ADP and P, they're going to make that covalent bond that is going to hold on to the energy in ATP and then also NADPH. So they're holding on to that energy. They're going to enter the electron transport system or chain. So in our little diagram here, we start with photosystem 2. One of these is the reaction center. They take electrons, they charge them up, and the electrons go through the electron transport chain. You can see in this first part that energy is being used to specifically drive ATP. When we look at photosystem 1, those charged up electrons make NADPH over here. In our electron transport chain, they jump from carrier to carrier to carrier. The balls of the electron transport system or chain. And with every jump that they make, they give off a little bit of energy to glue together an ADP plus a P when we're talking about photosystem 2. When we're talking about photosystem 1, they're taking NADP plus an H and they're gluing that together to make NADPH. So every jump, they're just like, here, have some energy. Take some of what I got charged up with in the reaction center of the light harvesting complex. they're releasing energy, so they're giving off energy. It's exiting them. That's an exergonic reaction. You have an endergonic reaction, ADP plus P. They're going to take that energy, make a covalent bond to make ATP, or in photosystem 1, NADP plus H, they're going to take that energy, they're going to form that bond. So here's our endergonic reactions again. In photosystem 2, ADP, P, 2 electrons, and the energy are going to make ATP. We start with photosystem 2 and then we go down to 1. Photosystem 2 makes ATP from ADP, P, 2 electrons, and that energy. In photosystem 1, NADP, hydrogen, 2 electrons, they're going to form NADPH. And the energy. So again, remember, start with photosystem 2, and then we go to photosystem 1. It doesn't go 1, 2, it goes 2, 1. I don't know why. Where those initial electrons come from, before anything starts, water has to get split. So remember, the overall equation for photosynthesis is light energy from the sun, carbon dioxide, and water. The water at the beginning is very important to get split apart so it can release electrons to the light harvesting complex to get charged up by the reaction center. So let's talk a little bit about the splitting of water. Water, and we chop it up. We're getting 2 hydrogens and a 1/2 O2. These cancel out, which means that you have 1 oxygen. Some books, I like to just mention this because sometimes if you're like, what, 1/2 O2 is just 1. Yes, correct, 1. We write it like this often because molecular oxygen, which has the need for 2 electrons in its outer shell, will immediately make a double covalent bond with another oxygen to form O2. So you don't get an oxygen just kind of like bouncing around in the world. They go right away. Immediately make that double covalent bond so that each oxygen fulfills the need for 2 electrons in the outer shell by making 2 covalent bonds. So just to note that, 1/2 O2 is 1 oxygen because oxygen travels around as an O2 together. We get 2 electrons. So the oxygen gets exhaled by the leaf. Remember the surface of the leaf? Underneath there are pores, and the pores just release the oxygen right away. So that's where the oxygen that we are breathing in our atmosphere or our air comes from right away, the beginning of photosynthesis. The hydrogens, NADPH, they're going to help make NADPH, and the electrons are going to bounce around, and they're going to glue together ADP plus P, or the NADP plus the H to make the NADPH. Oxygen gets released, as I said, right into the air. Ah, thank goodness, we're breathing now. O2 production is something that we could track in an experiment like we did in lab 8. Sometimes I was checking, I didn't really see bubbling on the leaves. Sometimes you can see in the solution, you can see the little oxygen bubbles. I didn't see that going on, but this could have been something that was going on, maybe like somebody had run this experiment for 5 hours and you really start to see all those oxygens coming together in bubbles. So we can use that oxygen production to track the overall rate of oxygen production in different kinds of photosynthetic organisms, autotrophs or producers. And we did that with our 3 different ones. What we found was the hornwort was the most oxygen productive and then the allodia, and then the green algae. Sometimes because the different kinds of algae that we use in that experiment, sometimes the algae get a little burnt out. They get overstimulated. They slow down their rate of photosynthesis. We were one of the last groups to do it. So I know the allodia and the green algae were used quite a bit. And so it's interesting if we were able to run this when all three groups were fresh, because the hornwort wasn't used by anybody else, only us. So that could be part of the reason why the hornwort had more oxygen production. All right, chloroplast, grana, thylakoids. Each thylakoid, this is embedded in here, in the membrane. So here's what you really need to know. What I do on your exam for next week is I will leave a blank sheet of paper on the back, so you can rip off that blank sheet of paper. What I would do, and has worked for a lot of students, is take these, carry them around with you. Some students have said like they just go into classrooms when they have time and they start to draw this out and talk through it. And this happens and that happens and that happens, and then they start drawing out this one. So these two are what you need to know for photosynthesis. This is what you need to know for cell respiration. So if you just keep drawing these out until you can draw them out and then explain them clearly, when you get to the exam, you can rip off, what I suggest, rip off that back piece of paper, and before you even look at the exam, draw these out from memory. And that way you have a nice key while it's all before you get too nervous and it's fresh in your mind. And then you feel like it also boosts a lot of confidence that you're like, okay, I got this key that I made because I knew this really, really well. And then that way it makes the exam go amazingly. I have found that students who do what I suggest get amazing grades. And the students who are like, oh, I didn't really do that because I just thought I could just memorize it, don't get amazing grades often. So use these, carry them around with you, get to know them and love them. So for example, when you're explaining this, the way I would talk through it is I would say that water is needed at the beginning of photosynthesis. Water gets split into an oxygen, 2 hydrogens, 2 electrons. The electrons go over to photosystem 2 that is embedded in the thylakoid membrane. The light harvesting complex is about 300 pigment molecules, and all of them those pigment molecules are absorbing energy from the sun. They all take that energy from the sun and they pass it over to one special chlorophyll molecule called the reaction center. The reaction center is going to take these 2 electrons from the splitting of water, and it's going to take them from a low energy state and it's going to charge them up, and they're going to be full of energy. And so that they go over to the electron transport chain with all this energy, and they jump through a series of protein carriers, and every time they jump, there's an ADP, and this is one thing I would add to this as a kind of a remembrance. So that as they're jumping through each of those, they're giving off a little bit of energy to ADP plus P to make an ATP. Electron has some more energy. ADP plus P waiting at the next electron carrying molecule. ADP plus P, they make another ATP, still has a little bit more energy. And it keeps doing that until that electron becomes a low energy state. And we started with 2 electrons. So now these 2 electrons at the end, they're like, I gave up all my energy. I'm so tired. I'm going to go over now. So this part of the thylakoid membrane, I'm going to go over to photosystem 1. And I'm going to get re-energized by the reaction center of the light harvesting complex of photosystem 1. And I'm going to jump through a series of carriers, and each carrier I am jumping through. I'm going to take 2 hydrogens from the splitting of water, plus an NADP. I'm going to use these final electrons are going to glue together NADP and H and make that bond to hold the energy I'm getting off. That's it. So just make sure you can walk through, talk yourself through that, and you've got the light harvesting, the light dependent reactions. The light dependent reactions can happen as long as there's light. As long as there's light, as long as there's water, they can just go, go, go. If a plant is too dehydrated, for example, like I know I walked the dog this morning and I saw my plants were a little droopy, and I was like, okay, I gotta get to work. So I walked the dog and I'm like, I got to water the plants today so that they can do their light dependent reactions. So I know that my plants that are a little dehydrated are going to be doing this a lot slower. They're not going to be super productive because they're low on this. So they need to have water, they need to have sunlight. Anybody, any questions about the light dependent reactions? Okay, so let's talk about the light independent reactions. So now we're going to flip over our paper to what we call light independent reactions, or the Calvin cycle, or the Calvin-Benson cycle, or the C3 cycle. Oh, it goes by a lot of names. Come on, biologists, stick with it. Okay, we'll talk about this next time. I want to talk about the hydrogen pumps and all that. We'll get to that. Okay, oh, before we get there, and this is contextualizes what you're seeing in terms of the thylakoid membrane. You can see that what you have on your page essentially looks like that. Which statement is true regarding the light-dependent reactions? They rely on energy provided by glucose synthesis. We didn't talk about anything glucose related yet. Good. Oxygen is required. No, oxygen is made, not required. Without water, the system would shut down. ATP and NADPH are needed. Good, they're made, good, good. Without photosystem 1, photosystem 2 could not occur. Opposite, right. Photosystem 2 has to go first to provide the electrons to photosystem 1. Good, good, good. So C is correct. So here's what happened. We did the light-dependent reactions. Sunlight energy and water started this all off. In the thylakoid membranes, out shoots oxygen right away from the splitting of water, and we build up the energy-carrying molecules ATP and NADPH. These are going to get broken down to fuel the light-independent reactions so that we can use carbon dioxide and more water to make glucose, and then break down our energy-carrying molecules so then they can get recycled and built back up in another cycle of photosynthesis. So light-independent reactions is also called the Calvin cycle, the Calvin-Benson cycle, the C3 cycle. They occur in the stroma, the liquidy, gooey medium that surrounds the thylakoids. So all of this in here, just outside of the thylakoids, that's the stroma. That's where these are happening. They're called light independent because they don't need sunlight. They can happen in the sunlight, but they don't need it. So just remember that they may happen during the day, or they can happen at night also. These are more likely to happen at night when it's been a sunny day. When it's a sunny day, you have a lot of sunlight to keep that photosystem 2 and 1 going. So what they need is on a sunny day, you're going to make a whole bunch of ATP and NADPH. ATP and NADPH are energy carrying molecules that are carrying or holding on to the energy from the sun. So last week we had a really rainy, gray day. Some sunlight does filter through the atmosphere and through clouds. So photosynthetic organisms, autotrophs, are still doing photosystem, the light-dependent reactions, but just it's really, really, really slow. They're not at their max. Water, right? We have to split water. Oh, sorry, water. Let me go back to Kelvin cycle. Water's always needed. We're always making and breaking things, right? So water for the Kelvin cycle also. We also need carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide comes in on the undersurface of the leaf through the same pore that oxygen leaves out of. So oxygen goes out, carbon dioxide comes in. Respiration, right? Just like us. We're using it in a different way. We're taking in oxygen and letting go carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxides we breathe out help us to make our own food. So let's talk about the main steps. I do put the big names for reference, just so that like when you revisit this again, if you take like a cell biology class or you take microbiology, you might come back to this whole process again. So carbon dioxide attaches, when we're talking about attaching of anything in biology, we call that fixation or fixed. That carbon dioxide fixes into the system. Specifically, it's going to be 6 carbon dioxides. Glucose has 6 carbons in it. So 6 carbon dioxides provide the 6 carbons for glucose. Oh, sorry. So they attach to the beginning of what we call this cycle. You can see this goes around. And the starting point over here on the left side, specifically it's 6 RUBPs or ribulose bisphosphate. We always end up in the Kelvin cycle. They always end up regenerating RUBP, so that RUBP is just used over and over again. You can see the input carbon dioxide. You need those 6 carbon dioxides to make this cycle go around once to make 1 glucose. There's a series of reactions between carbon dioxide being fixed into here and the RUBP to make PGA. PGA is phosphoglycerate. That goes through a series of reactions. You can see here now we're starting to utilize our energy carrying molecules. They're starting to get broken down. So to go from our PGA to our G3P here, it's fueled by the breakdown of ATP and NADPH. G3P, glyceraldehyde, 3-phosphate. Kind of like ATP, it's got 3 phosphates, boop, 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 that are hanging off of it. There's 12 that are made here. Of these 12, 2 of them go off and make glucose. 10 go back through a series of reactions to regenerate RUBP. So these 12, 2 of them go off to make glucose. The other 10 stay in the system to eventually regenerate RUBP. G3P, each of them have 3 carbons. 3 plus 3 is 6. 3 plus 3 is 6. The other 10, like I said, stay in the system to regenerate RUBP. More ATP gets broken down to fuel that process. Breakdown of ATP is exergonic. Regeneration of RUBP is endergonic. Breaking this down fuels the regeneration of that. RUBP gets regenerated, the cycle's ready to start again if there is 6 carbon dioxides, ATP, NADPH, and water. So on a sunny day, this will just keep going all night. It'll go and go and go until all the ATPs and the NADPHs are used to regenerate RUBP so that glucose can be made. So like now, one of the things about I tend to plant my tomato plants a little too late. They used to say May 15th, so I always have that in the back of my head. But it really, like, because of climate change, we can go earlier. Tomatoes, it's all about the frost, when the last frost happens. So I have tons of green Roma tomatoes right now. And I want them to turn. They're not turning, it's too late. But a lot of that has to do with temperatures going down at night, get nice cool nights. Maybe less sunlight, although we've been lucky. I'm like, come on, there's so much sun to keep them warm during the day. I'm not sure what's going on with this climate. Anyway, as long as RUBP is regenerated, you've got 6 carbon dioxides, you've got a supply of ATP and NADPH, and a supply of water. The cycle keeps going around. So here, you can draw this out and walk through it with carbon fixation of 6 carbon dioxides at the beginning of the Calvin cycle. They will fix or attach to our 6 RUBPs. They go through a series of reactions to generate 12 PGAs. The 12 PGAs go through a series of reactions to generate 12 G3Ps, which are fueled by the breakdown of ATP, the breakdown of NADPH. Exergonic reactions fuel endergonic reaction. Of the 12 G3Ps, you can see here G3P is 1, 2, 3 carbons. 2 of these, 1, 2, go off to make our 6 carbon glucose. 10 of these continue on, fueled by the breakdown of ATP. To regenerate RUBP, we make 1 glucose. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 carbons and carbon dioxide come around through these first half cycles to make the carbons and glucose. Which of the following occurs during the light-independent reactions of photosynthesis? Water is converted into hydrogen and oxygen. Happens during the light-dependent reactions. Carbon dioxide is converted into sugars. Yeah. Chlorophyll acts as an enzyme only in the dark. Chlorophyll is a light harvesting pigment. Nothing occurs, the plant rests in the dark. None of the above. Okay, good. So carbon dioxide is converted into sugars. All right, main function of the Calvin cycle is to produce sugar. That sugar goes into various metabolic pathways to create whatever that plant is making in terms of food. So those sugars could become nuts and grains and seeds and beans, fruit and vegetables, oils, whatever plants make that we like to eat. That eventually becomes food sources. You have to have 6 carbon dioxides. You have to have 6 carbon dioxides. 6 carbon dioxides to make the 6 carbons in glucose. Carbon and glucose comes from carbon dioxide. Did I say that a bunch of times? I think I did. Yeah, that's important to know. So you have a little tiny role in making your own food. The light-dependent reactions release oxygen, make ATP and NADPH. The ATP and NADPH fuel the Calvin cycle, or the light-independent reactions. 6 carbon oxides come in, water is utilized, you make glucose or your food. Your energy-carrying molecules have been broken down. They're ready to go back into the light-dependent reactions. More sunlight energy. I missed this whole part. Water, remember water breaking down releases oxygen, but also it releases the electrons that are captured by ATP and NADPH, and also the hydrogens are used in NADPH. What is the role of water in photosynthesis? Yeah, provides the electrons, right? Provides the electrons. That is what water does here. All right, what affects photosynthesis? So remember that photosynthesis is catalyzed, it's a metabolic pathway that's catalyzed by enzymes. So all of these little lines are catalyzed by different enzymes. All of these little circles are enzymes. So let's go back to thinking about what affects the rate of enzyme reactions. What we put in. An increase in carbon dioxide. Again, this is just like, we're just thinking individually. Let's say all the other factors are there. Sunlight's there, water's there, everything's there. So if we increase carbon dioxide, in general, kind of like if everything else is perfect, it will increase the rate of photosynthesis. Any of the substrates, increase the substrates. Water, carbon dioxide, sunlight energy will increase the rate of photosynthesis. The product, oxygen, again, we're just saying everything else is optimal. Everything else is going really, really well. And we could get nitpicky about these in a lot of ways. But in general, for photosynthesis, if you give the plant a whole bunch of oxygen, it needs sunlight, water, carbon dioxide. Increased amount of sunlight, again, goes into the beginning, right? So increased sunlight should hypothetically increase the rate of photosynthesis. During a drought or a neglected plant keeper, why is the rate of photosynthesis in a plant reduced? Okay, they all start with when water is less available. The turgor pressure of the plant drops and the plant falls over. That's true, but that doesn't answer the question. When less water is available, fewer electrons are around to fuel the ETC.
Yes.
That sounds really good. When less water is available, electrons are not supplied to the Calvin cycle. No. When less water is available, oxygen is not available. No. So good. Letter B is correct. All right, increase or decrease in the products in general, like again, we're just isolating photosynthesis, will generally not have an effect on the rate of photosynthesis. Temperature, right now. getting colder. So your plants, they're slowing down. All the molecules are moving slower. Increased temperature will increase the rate of photosynthesis. Is there a limit? Good.
Yes.
Okay, so, right, temperature, rainforests are at the equator. Coral reefs are, around the equator where there's more sunlight. They're very productive ecosystems because they have a lot more sunlight. They have better temperature, water availability, all those other things. But if the temperature gets too high, which in some of those areas, some of the autotrophs may be affected by too high of temperatures, especially if we're talking about the ocean temperatures and the zooxanthellae inside of the corals or algae could denature the enzymes and slow down the rate of photosynthesis. All of the following compounds are required, meaning they are necessary constituents for chemical reactions at some state of green plant photosynthesis, except what? Okay, so good. We make ATP and NADPH, which are used by the light independent reactions. You need water for the splitting of electrons. Oxygen is a product, and you need 6 carbon dioxides for every oxygen to be made. Okay, so those there. All right.